Welcome to the APRA Arkansas Conference. My name is Rachel Gray, and I am the president of APRA Arkansas. We are so excited you all are here and delighted you'll be joining us for a fun-filled day of professional development. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We will begin our day with two professional development presentations and return from lunch for the business portion of our meeting. During the presentations, we ask that everyone switch their mic and camera to mute so as to avoid interruptions. There will definitely be interactive portions throughout the conference where you get to ask questions and give thoughts. And we're going to give you plenty of time and notice so that you can switch them back on at that point. If you have questions, please utilize the chat box in Zoom. We'll stop to answer them throughout the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, looks like we have somebody else waiting to get in. Let me admit them. Okay, well, let's talk about our first presentation. So I'd like to kick off in the morning with our first session with Lori Hood Lawson. Lori Hood Lawson has spent her career focused on helping organizations turn data into actionable intelligence. She is the Vice President of Advancement Insights for the UC Innovation and the co-founder of WorkingPhilanthropy.com LLC. She previously served as Director of Strategic Solutions for Kinterra Penn, where she managed a team of consultants serving more than 300 nonprofit organizations in identification of prospective donors via wealth screening. Before joining Penn, Lori enjoyed the role of Associate Director of Research for the Florida State University Foundation, where she received the Administrator of the Year Award. Lori is a member of APRA, where she serves as a member and former chair for its Ethics and Compliance Committee, former co-chair of its Online Curriculum Committee, and former member of its Body of Knowledge Committee. She has served on the board of the Florida chapter of APRA, most recently as President and Director at Large. Lori is also a member of the AASP, where she has served on its Prospect Development Best Practices Committee for many years. She was a member of the Fundraising Operations Certification Task Force and served as adjunct faculty and member for the Fundraising Operations Certification Program at the Rice University Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership. Lori, I'm going to share my screen and we'll let you take it away. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Everyone, if you can let me know that you can hear me okay, or Rachel, if you come off mute and tell me yes, or everybody nod that you can hear me fine. I know, she just told you to turn off your video and I'm asking you to nod. I know, interesting times. I hope that everyone is doing well. And let's see, Rachel, you're sharing your screen shortly. There we go. So what we're going to do, Rachel's going to advance the slides when I say, hey, okay, Rachel, next slide. But I'm going to turn off my video so you don't have to stare at me with my AT&T operator headset on, but also so that the bandwidth can be kind of reduced and maybe there won't be any technical issues during this. So I'm about to turn off my video. Okay, so today I've been invited to talk with you about ethics, and in particular we're going to discuss the due diligence toolkit that the Ethics and Compliance Committee has developed, and we are going to have a live walkthrough of the ethics website that APRA has, and we will I'll walk you through the toolkits and how we envision that the membership and the sector would utilize these toolkits. You can go to the next slide, Rachel. Okay, so we're going to have, again, the brief overview of what the committee does. We are going to have some polls throughout. Now, we have the luxury of having in my opinion, the right size of attendees so that we can have some interaction and some real discussion. But for me to get to know you better, we will have a few polls, and Rachel will, have that on screen. Like I said, we are going to discuss due diligence, the basics, and the newish toolkit. I'm going to tell you some inside baseball. So what the Ethics and Compliance Committee has on the horizon for to help the membership. And then, of course, the open discussion. As Rachel mentioned, please submit your questions via chat throughout. And Rachel, if you can see the chat while I'm speaking, then if there's an important question that you want to interject, please come off mute and tell me what that question is. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So let me tell you a bit about what APRA's Ethics and Compliance Committee is all about. First of all, we are comprised of prospect development professionals from different types of organizations. So it's not just universities, but we also have representatives from healthcare to children's museums and children's hospitals, and to global children's emergency nonprofits. We meet once a month, but we do have some special subcommittees for our various projects from year to year. So those subcommittees will meet more often than once a month usually. Now, in terms of subcommittees, for example, I initially joined as a member of the special subcommittee back in, I think, 2009 or so, to help develop APRA's social media ethics policy, which has now been blended into the new APRA ethics and compliance principles. Yes, that replaced the APRA ethics statement. So we can take a look at that in real time in a bit as well. But when I joined for that special subcommittee, I was not a member of the official ethics committee, but now they haven't been able to get rid of me. so I'm still on the committee after all these years. And it's something I'm passionate about. Members of the ECC, as we refer to ourselves, we are the authors and editors of everything that you will see on the APRA ethics webpage. And again, we'll go through that towards the end of the slideshow. We also author the Ask the Ethicist columns for APRA Connections. Members of the ECC are often asked to speak at industry conferences like this one. And we partner with other associations in our sector to promote ethics and compliance throughout our industry. The ECC developed and updated the Ethics and Compliance Toolkit about 2 years ago now. And in the late summer of 2020, we launched the Due Diligence Toolkit, which we'll be reviewing in depth today. We are currently finalizing a due diligence toolkit for vetting vendors in our space, and we are working on a DEI data toolkit. We will be planning, we're planning a webinar to introduce the DEI data toolkit to our sector, and look for that later this year. Now, if you are passionate about ethics and compliance, we invite you to let us know of your interest and consider volunteering with the ECC. We do have a blast. We do have a lot of moving parts, and we do put in a lot of effort on the work products that you see. But it's incredibly, I love it. Obviously, they can't kick me off the committee. Rachel, next slide, please. And I think it's a poll. Okay, so we're going to conduct this poll. The question is, what does your organization have regarding an ethics policy? So you only get to pick one. So the options are, we have written ours and use it. We have one in development, or it's being talked about. We refer to APRA, AFP, and other organizations' policies, or we don't currently have a policy. So if you would select the best fit, the best action, the best answer for your organization. Sorry, I will take another sip of my latte while you're thinking about this poll. Okay, let's see, Rachel, do we have some answers? Okay, so 35%, we have written ours and use it. That's fabulous. We have one in development. It's being talked about, 6% of you. That's still fabulous. We refer to APRA, AFP, or other organizations' policies. And that's also fabulous. We don't currently have a policy. I think you're going to want a policy, even if it's just referencing the one that APRA has. Now, this is what it will tell you, though. You should, and we will review it, but I've seen very recently some vendors in our space reference the APRA ethics statement, and that doesn't exist anymore. It's been replaced by the principles of ethics and compliance. So if you do refer to APRA's ethics policy, you'll want to take a closer look and make sure that it's still in alignment with what your organization or department wants to agree to. All right, next slide, which is another poll. So this poll is, do you have a due diligence policy? So your options, we have written ours and use it. We have one in development or it's being discussed. We refer, do you see a theme here? Okay, so we refer to APRA, AFP, other organizations' policies. We don't currently have a policy. We are not sure we need due diligence. Okay, so select the best answer for your current situation. Okay, Rachel, let's see if we have any answers yet. We have written ours and use it. That's fabulous. We have one in development or it's being discussed. This is very common right now. I cannot tell you how many different organizations have contacted me about how to develop their policy. We refer to APRA, AFP, other organizations' policies. Okay. We don't currently have a policy. Hopefully that's going to change after this session. And we are not sure we need due diligence, and hopefully that will also change after this session. There are, but we're going to discuss why would you ever have one. Okay, thank you for taking those polls. There will be another one at near the end of the slideshow. Rachel, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So why in the world would you be concerned with due diligence? You know, as prospect development professionals, we are actually tasked with mitigating risk to our organizations through a variety of tasks that we do, one of which should be and is due diligence, also known as vetting or screening. You may have already performed some due diligence tasks or activities without formally calling it due diligence. So, you know, it may fall under your see something, say something kind of thing when you're performing any prospect research on a prospective donor. So, you know, you wouldn't necessarily hide the fact that, you know, let's say you're researching someone who's involved in a racketeering allegation. You wouldn't withhold that information, right? You're not just looking for all of the good stuff to put in a deliverable for your gift officers to use. You know, you want to make sure they're aware of any landmines he or she or they might step on. Now, there are several reasons to perform due diligence. Obviously, a legal risk. So, what does it mean to take a gift from, you know, let's look at the Sacklers, right? And all of the opioid addictions and controversy around that. That also a number of these risks will bleed into the other one, right? So that would be a reputational risk for you all as well. And then, of course, you've got the financial risk regarding will that money still be available for them to fulfill their pledge if they're involved in this long drawn out lawsuit, for example, and the dependency risks. So what that is really referring to, if you take, a $50 million gift, so that's a pretty big gift, is that a donor buying influence into how your organization or a specific program is run? And what happens if you're only reliant upon that $50 million gift for that program? What happens when the donor doesn't agree with something that your organization did with his or her or their money, right? So how dependent are you on that specific gift? And that's a reason to perform some due diligence task. And we will go into the toolkit in depth later in this session. Rachel, you can go to the next one. Thank you. So in the toolkit, we do provide some building blocks for you all to perfect your policy, to tweak your policy, to actually build a policy if you don't have one. The first step in the process that we suggest is, you need to find and read your organization's gift acceptance policy and or that process, right? We find that the due diligence policy also is complemented by your organization's relationship management policy, if you have one. And you should have a gift acceptance policy. It may not specifically reference, anything about we will not take gifts of stock from a cannabis company, for example. But it should have something in there about what the gift acceptance committee has to really think about. So a lot of gift acceptance policies will have very specific parameters around naming opportunities, because that tends to be the larger gifts, right? You wouldn't necessarily perform a due diligence task on every single gift that is being solicited, right? So in your policy, you'll actually detail when, what triggers the due diligence process. So in your due diligence policy, you should describe the issue and the affected stakeholders. And we give you really good, I think, information to help you describe the issue. Why would you need to do this? In the due diligence policy, you should absolutely detail what the process is for doing this. What are the applicable resources? What are your staff responsibilities for this? And we do provide to you in the toolkit examples of other organizations' due diligence policies. So you can absolutely go through and decide what could work for your organization. You need to identify in the policy who owns the policy, right? So is it the prospect development department? Is it overall advancement services? Is it, the director of development for your organization? Who owns the policy? And also include in your due diligence policy how often the policy will be reviewed. Okay, because this should be a living, breathing document, right? Things change. You should introduce your draft due diligence policy to your colleagues and supervisors and get buy-in and sign off, and obviously adjust as necessary if your colleagues bring up something else that wasn't considered. We feel on the ECC that you should include your legal counsel to review the policy as necessary, and that might be required by your organization. So you can't just necessarily throw out this policy to everyone and say, this is what we're doing. There is likely some approval process on your side. Okay, Rachel, you can go to the next slide. Now, the ECC, we highly suggest your organization develop its own process and policy, as we know that this will differ from organization to organization based on type and likely size. What could be a red flag for like an environmental nonprofit, like the Nature Conservancy, in terms of taking a donation from someone whose wealth was derived from the fossil fuel extraction industry, may not be a red flag for like an art museum or a children's hospital, right? Knowing what your organization's risk tolerance level is also key to developing your due diligence process, but this will also evolve over time. So I mentioned cannabis a bit ago. Just think about the legalization of marijuana, right? So that alone likely changed many policies with several organizations. As you help your organization develop its own due diligence processes and policies, again, we recommend involving your other colleagues, especially those in donor relations, your colleagues in finance, as well as your legal counsel as appropriate. And this, I should have said this earlier on, but this is now a good time to say that the ECC committee members, we are not accountants or lawyers. Additionally, we recognize that while development may be in alignment with your due diligence practices, your organization's leadership may not be so aligned. So think about, what your gift officer's goals are. I mean, they're not necessarily written as, your gift officer has to bring in, $10 million, but only from ethically sourced wealth. I mean I would be shocked if your fundraisers, if your frontline fundraisers actually have a goal that is framed within an ethical framework, right? So rewarded behavior is repeated behavior. Promoting a due diligence policy does involve, getting leadership on board with that, right? Next slide, Rachel. All right, so within the due diligence toolkit, the ECC, we've outlined a suggested process for performing due diligence. The ECC's suggestions include a review, of course, of your own organization's current policies, researching peer organizations or other reputable organizations and their relationships with the prospect or donor in question. If you are able to do so, we do recommend reaching out directly to your peer organizations when appropriate. I mean, you do want to maintain confidentiality of your prospective donors and current donors, but if you have a close colleague at a peer organization who might speak to you about, did you have any issues with getting approval for the Sackler gift, for example? That might be enough to talk, without divulging any confidential information. Searching court records for any lawsuits, open and closed, running a criminal background check, searching the registered sexual offender database. While these may seem onerous, typically these are really quick searches, right? So unless, of course, you find information that requires further research. So checking these resources, oftentimes you find nothing, and that's, okay, I've done that part, didn't find anything, that's good. You can also run, and we suggest running a negative news search for not only the prospect, but also any affiliated businesses. We really feel that this is very important. Also search for the prospect source of wealth and how that is in alignment with your organization's mission or how it's not in alignment with your organization's mission, and policies regarding gift acceptance. You can, we suggest extending that negative news search to other family members as appropriate, as well as others with whom your prospect is closely connected. Suggested search terms, we have those listed in the toolkit, and we'll go through those in just a second. Additionally, we do suggest researching any ESG issues regarding your prospect, especially with regards to affiliated businesses or the prospect's company. So if you have a number of prospective donors or current donors who are, their source of wealth is very much tied to their private company, you're going to want to make sure that you do due diligence on the private company as well, which can be tricky, as all private company research is. But again, you're just looking to mitigate risk. So, we recognize that it's not typically prospect development's duty to decide whether or not to go forward with cultivating a specific prospect. We can only suggest what the risk level is, and then it's up to your leadership to decide whether or not they're willing to take that risk. Okay, so we've got one more poll question, and then I really do want to dive into our APRA website and walk you through the different toolkits, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So, get ready to be off mic soon or off mute. So what ethics issues are you most concerned about? And you can only pick one. FEC data, the GDPR, CCPA, CPRA / all of the privacy laws, due diligence, or data breach. So please pick one. Many of you may think that should have had an all of the above option, but I just want to get a sense of what you all want to really focus our discussion on. Okay, let's see. FEC data, only 7%. Thank you. I know. Privacy laws, 7%. Due diligence, 53%. Yay! Data breach, 33%. We will, of course, during the open discussion, you can ask me anything. It's like an ask me anything without Reddit. But we will touch a little bit on the data breach, because I want to, I say a data breach that happened last year, or actually happened, gosh, in 2019, I guess. We will touch on that because there is something that I want to share. So Rachel, I guess now you have to let me share my screen. All right, let's see. You may have to make me co-host, Rachel. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's see. Now you all should see APRA's website. And if Rachel, you can let me know if anyone's having issues with not seeing the APRA website. Just let me know and I will figure it out. But on APRA's webpage, so let's just go to the very front page. This is what you see when you first get to APRA's website, and where the APRA ethics page is actually under resources, and it's called ethics and standards. So when you click on there, you'll see, a relatively flat page, right? but we want you to click through to the various areas of interest. So in this case, let's walk through first the due diligence toolkit, and then I will show you the other areas that we have. So when you click on the due diligence toolkit, there's this, lead in about why we did this and who did this, who worked on it. But then for your own due diligence policy, you may want to use some of our language that we have right here. So, and I kind of brought up part of this in the slideshow. And forgive me if you can hear my dog barking in the background. It's a corgi. Corgis make themselves known even with doors closed. Anyway, it defines what due diligence is and what activities are required. And let's see, corgis are the best. Thank you. They are. These concerns can range from criminal and legal issues to questionable sources of wealth. While prospect development professionals rarely make the final decision regarding whether to move forward with a prospective or current donor, due diligence activities better inform the nonprofit organization in making that decision. Okay, so then you can see there are some flat areas here. You really, when you click on it, then it expands. So here are the definitions and some questions about the different types of risk, which you could easily use in your own due diligence policy. Then when we expand the due diligence process, we reviewed that pretty much already, but I'm going to show you where the search terms are. Okay. Now, the next section is building your due diligence policy. This this really goes into detail about what you need to do, okay, to formulate your own. And then there is a link to the APRA/ASP best practices for vetting research. So this best practices document, for those of you, well, for all of you, some of you may know this already, but APRA has a partnership with the Association of Advancement Services Professionals, where there's a best practices and prospect development committee, and that committee meets and drafts new best practices policies for prospect development. And there is one for vetting research. Let's see if it will take us to it. It is downloading the PDF. So you don't even have to go out of APRA's website, out of APRA's due diligence policy page to get to the best practice in vetting prospects. And this best practices document, it also includes some examples of a policy, and you can see how long it is. We worked really hard on this one. I think I was on this committee then. Yep. So you can see there's a example here, and this is why you want to go here. The sample gift trigger checklist. All right, so this is a way for you to think about, or even just use as is, to figure out how and within what framework do you need to conduct any due diligence task, right? I just love how we formulated this. This is great. And this was outside the ECC, right? So this is specifically with the ASP best practices for prospect development committee. There are APRA members on there. And I think Catherine Flatten from George Washington is still the chair of this. But that's also another way. If you find, if you just love the idea of creating best practices and contributing to that, I know that they are always looking for additional volunteers. So if you have, if you want to know how to do that, just you can email me later and I'll tell you how. So back on APRA's site, so we've got, that was located here, and this is not behind a firewall. So if you're not a dues paying member of APRA International, you can still get to this. And I'm not logged in at all. Let me make sure. Yep, I'm not logged in. None of this is behind a firewall. And we on the ECC, we were very adamant about, if we're going to help the sector at large, we can't have this kind of information behind a firewall. We just can't. And APRA's board agreed. So right under the best practices for vetting research section, there are sample due diligence policies that we've curated here for you with permission from the University of California, Irvine and the University of Edinburgh. So if you just click on that, it will download. And you see this is UC Irvine's, and it's very short. It's 1 page. So your due diligence policy doesn't have to be, 10 pages long. It can be very simple and straightforward, right? Now let me show you the other one. This is University of Edinburgh, and this is 8 pages long. But this is a detailed process and an assessment of the sources of donations and when does the due diligence process get triggered, right? So they take it through, different ranges of gifts, right? But I invite you later on to read all of this. This is good stuff. And there's a risk template. So what we did in the due diligence policy toolkit, we created a sample risk template for you to use as well. So let's go back over to the APRA page, and let me show you first. There is a connections article written by APRA board member Lindsay that came out with these wonderful charts. So we show you the charts before you even click through to the article, which you can click through there. Again, not behind the firewall. This is great. And Lindsay walks you through what that means for her. And it's, Lindsay was also involved on the best practices in vetting prospects, APRA ASP document. So, I invite you to really look through this in terms, through the lens of your own organization and what your own policy needs to have or doesn't have yet. Now, back at the APRA due diligence toolkit, here are the suggested templates to use and include in your organization's due diligence policy. This is pretty exhaustive, but when you get to sources, you might have a special source that you would use that's not listed here. Is this helpful to you all? I know I can't see you. Maybe just chat me something that says, oh yeah, this is great. Or wow, I've got a lot of reading to do. Let's see. Oh, good. Good. Yeah, we put a lot of work into this. I hope it shows and I hope it's helpful to you all. We felt it's very important. Cool. Hey, Christine. I'm sorry, I'm obviously reading chat. Really, yes, that it's accessible to non-APRA members. So we are very, on the ECC, we're like ethics and compliance for everyone. It just shouldn't be about, can your organization afford the APRA international dues, or can you personally pay for it yourself? No, we wanted it to really help everyone. So as you scroll down, you will see there's a risk assessment scoring template. So we gave it to you pretty easy, right? Is it a low risk? Is it a medium risk? Is it a high risk? And the way that you would say these, articulate the risk level within your organization for certain prospects, you would simply say something like, based on the available data regarding evidence of money laundering and fraud, uh, proceeding with cultivation or engagement of Lori Hood Lawson poses a high risk. There you go, right? So you're not passing judgment. You're just saying, hey, this is what we found, and you may want to proceed with caution, right? There was a roundtable, a virtual roundtable back in August when APRA had its PD conference virtually. And I was chairing this roundtable, and it was on due diligence. And we had a number of people join that roundtable, and a number of our colleagues in the sector, their team didn't feel that they could really do this. They didn't feel comfortable in making this judgment call. And I think it's just not necessarily being framed in the right way, right? So this is about protecting the organization. It's not about, judging the worthiness of any prospective donor, right? And if you frame it in that way, and if you have a process, look, in our gift agreement, it's a gift acceptance policy. It says that we won't take donations of cannabis stock because it's still not legal at the federal level in the US. Okay, so you're not making a judgment call if you say, hey, Lori owns a cannabis company and we feel, obviously her wealth is coming from that company. And per our gift acceptance policy, we won't take stock in cannabis companies. So then it's up to your your leadership to determine, well, do we proceed with Lori or not? We just have to make sure we don't take stock, and it's got to be a cash gift or something like that, right? So, but this is, once you have your policy and process in place and that it can be applied in a very methodical and repeatable way, then, that should make the acceptance level of your organization actually doing that. And, oh, I'm so glad we're doing that, right? So it's all about framing it. Now, we do provide you some search terms for due diligence research. We also, for those of you who are rusty on your Boolean search logic, we give you some tutorials to that even. I have a master's in library science, so, Boolean is my life. But just in case there are issues there, we did give you some tutorials. So these are the suggested search terms. They all look kind of scary and everything, but they're not scary. It's just, this is what you need to do. We also gave you, with permission from LexisNexis, their actual search strings about how to find an individual's criminal activity in LexisNexis. If you have access to that, these are great to have right here. But if you don't have access to LexisNexis, these search strings we felt really captured what could guide your search, even on Google or DuckDuckGo. We also provided you a link to the WealthX due diligence webinar, which is an example of a vendor's offering that service in our sector. Okay, so doing a time check. Let's see, 11, 10. Okay, so are there any questions about the toolkit right now? You can chat them, or you can, I guess, Rachel, they could come off mute. Nothing so far. Okay. All right, so let me show you the other parts of, let me go back to the beginning. So that's the due diligence toolkit. When we have finalized the due diligence toolkit for vetting vendors, that will be a link here. It will be very much like the due diligence toolkit we just went through. If you have not seen the new APRA Principles of Ethics and Compliance, this was updated last year. And this, what we did on the committee, we combined the ethics statement with the social media ethics statement, because we're now at the point at which social media is simply another data source, right? An interactive data source, but still a data source. So we put this together last year as well. We had a busy year last year. And you will want to go through this, because while it incorporated elements of the APRA ethics statement, that was written back in like 2009 or updated in 2012. It was old. It was old. So I think this, we all thought that this better captured what we need to adhere to. And the board approved it. So just to reiterate, while we are a committee and we do a lot of work, none of it gets published or out to you without any board approval, except for Ask the Ethicist columns. We pretty much have autonomy on that. But like this had to get board approval. The due diligence toolkit had to get board approval, and the ethics toolkit. So let's go back over here. So the ethics toolkit also works a lot like the due diligence toolkit, and it is lengthy. It is very lengthy. You can see we separated that out, and that actually needs to get updated. I know you're like, Lori, you're talking your thoughts out loud. That is true. Okay. But within the APRA ethics toolkit, you'll see things like, how do you share information across your organization? Do you have a sharing policy? You should have a sharing policy. There is, of course, the list collection using FEC data, which we will talk about a little bit. I'll give you an update. But you can see like there are very specific, can I share this? What do we think about net worth? And again, not behind a firewall at all. So everything you see here, you just simply open up, right? And we invite you to really comb through this as well. Let's see what else is here. Okay. So the rest is pretty straightforward. The Donor Bill of Rights, learning about the committee, APRA Canada, the LinkedIn statement, which that's also an interesting piece that's happening in real time right now in terms of scraping data from LinkedIn. And there's a lawsuit right now between LinkedIn and a company called HiQ. Essentially, HiQ is a company that uses LinkedIn data to determine when someone's looking for another job. And HiQ has clients who are companies who pay them, for this service to monitor their employees, right? And who's going to leave soon. So it involves scraping data, and right now it's being considered by the Supreme Court. Yeah. I'm going to, well, here, let me show you this part. Let me, where is it? All right, so let's just talk about the FEC real quick. You may have seen on the APRA exchange, Amy, it is horrifying. It is. I can talk more about that case if you want, but in this case, one of the vendors in our sector called named Illuminate. I know this is being recorded, right? Okay, so I will measure my words. Back in October, AASP or ASP had their summit virtually, and Illuminate was there, and there was the virtual conference platform that ASP used had this roundtable component to it, right? So if you were a vendor or exhibitor, you could set up a roundtable with a certain topic, and Illuminate set up a roundtable with a topic called, come and see how we legally use FEC data in our product for you. I could not attend that roundtable. I was busy doing something else at the conference or virtually. And so I asked a colleague of mine if he could attend, and he's on the APRA board, so he attended. And essentially, it was like, I don't think that's kosher. No, how you're using it. Now, kudos to Illuminate for seeking an advisory opinion from the Federal Election Commission. Okay, so for the way, my understanding of how this process works is that I personally, Lori, could not have asked the FEC for an advisory opinion about the use of FEC data, individual contributor data in our sector. I'm not with a nonprofit. I'm not with a company who uses this data. So I could not have gone forward and asked for that. But Illuminate, being a vendor who wants to use the data and is using individual contributor data, submitted a request for an advisory opinion. And all of this is out there in the public domain. I mean, you should go read what they put forward, right? And how they are using it. Now, there was a meeting that was scheduled for March 11th, and for the FEC to consider the draft advisory that it had provided to Illuminate, which essentially said, yeah, no, you can't use this data. Okay, but all of these are available for, public comment, right? The FEC received a public comment like on March 10th that was deemed to have arrived late. So on March 11th, even though it was, this issue was on the agenda for their meeting on March 11th to finalize, it was tabled. So I think when the final advisory opinion comes out, I think it will be closer to mid-April. But it's interesting when you look at the comments, the comment that was submitted, and this was not from Illuminate, it was from another law office, and it actually listed out the different advisory opinions that support Illuminate's use of FEC individual contributor data. And I'm not a lawyer. I absolutely love reading this stuff. It's true. But I will be shocked. I will be shocked if the FEC says, oh yes, Illuminate, you can use individual political contributor information. So anyone can find the FEC commission meetings. So you just go to fec.gov /meetings /, and they're all listed here. So you can see the last one they had was March 11th, and it was recorded. but you can see that they decided for Illuminate that that would be held over for a future meeting. So there is that. There is one other issue I want to bring up, and I want people to talk instead of me. There was a hack, right? A data breach, right? That happened with one of our vendors in our space. So what I found interesting about this article was that MSU, created an investigation, an internal investigation about the data breach, the Blackbaud data breach. And what that final report came out with was that, hey, inadvertently, we also saw where there was more data that the foundation, the fundraising foundation had that they shouldn't have had at all in violation of FERPA. Now, one might say that some of this data, well, FERPA says that, we can use directory information, right? But what I found interesting is that FERPA, while it has, hey, if it's student directory information, then you don't need to get permission to use that. You can use that in fundraising or whatever. Well, FERPA also says, hey, you schools and universities, you've got to say very explicitly in a public location what that directory information is. What is in the student directory? What is considered student directory information for you? And that's what this internal investigation discovered, was that the fundraising foundation had been given data, directory information data that was legit from FERPA, but hey, not legit based on what that university said was directory information. Isn't that interesting? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I would love for people to come off mute and ask me anything. I'll even turn on my video. All right, or you can chat your question in chat, or I can just continue to talk all to myself.
Hi, Lori. I have a question for you.
Hi, Carol.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
You too.
I am thrilled with all the information about due diligence. It's something that I think we don't really have. I don't know that we, anyhow.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was wondering, and I know you talked just a little bit about sources and LexisNexis. Can you talk a little bit more about other sources that we might want to be looking at?
Sure. So in one of my clients in working philanthropy land, they use a product called MSCI, which is Morgan Stanley. It's a Morgan Stanley product, but they use that for their corporate due diligence. So specifically around environmental, social, and governance concerns. And that is a fee-based product. I cannot tell you how much it costs, but that's primarily for corporate, company-related due diligence. In terms of other resources to use, which we have listed there, maybe I can share again. Let's see. Let me get back over here. I've got too many windows open. Okay. All right, so can you see my screen just fine?
Yes.
Okay, so there are other resources, like there's Corporate Watch. You can find some information in SEC filings. I do think that a general news search can absolutely provide you with some information. In terms of court records, I use PACER, PACER. It's public access to court electronic records. And it's free to use, except when you hit a certain number of pages. So when you create your account, you'll be asked to have some, credit card on file. It's a government site, but it gives you access to be able to search by name across all of the available electronic court records. Keep in mind that for individuals and corporations. So keep in mind, though, that a lot of times any court case might get settled out of court, so you don't necessarily know the end result unless it's publicized, like in a newspaper or something like that. But I find that to be very helpful. There are all kinds of business and human rights sites, one of which is Business and Human Rights Center. And that's primarily for companies as well. But, again, when you formulate your due diligence policy, you will have some prospects who are closely aligned with their company, right? And so, they might not own the company, but they're like synonymous with that brand. That will ultimately impact how your university or nonprofit is seen if you take money or a donation from that person, even if it's not a corporate donation, if that makes sense. Obviously, I really think that it's the searching of publicly available data, news sites, newspapers, magazines, local newspapers, local to the prospect. I do think that that's an important aspect of this. So you still have your prospect research hat on through all of this. So any sources that you currently have, even if you don't have LexisNexis, you can still use elements of that search string in Google or DuckDuckGo and still pick up on all of that. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or something that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about? Don't be shy. You want to hear my opinion on anything that's in the news right now regarding ethics and compliance? Everybody's quiet. You can also chat, or I can just prattle on, pick one. Is your head just exploding with all of this information? Rachel, you're on mute.
I was going to say, it looks like we might have someone who's come off mute for a question.
Perfect.
Yeah. Hi, Anthony here. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of degrees of connection and how deep you would go on a typical due diligence search, particularly for a family where you have multiple family members who are associated with your institution, but then are you going to other branches of the family, or do you keep it within, like, what is that radius and how far do you go in terms of your searching out, knowing that, someone who has a second uncle who is really not in a good place right now might not be prohibitive, but I was curious if you could talk a little bit about where you draw the line for those types of situations.
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? So, how deep do you go into the back of that skeleton closet, for example? In my opinion, it depends on the level of gift and the level of engagement that your organization has with that family or that prospect. Typically, like where I like to start, I'll tell you what I do. Where I like to start is, what would someone, anyone, be able to read if they just Googled the family or Googled the person, right? I at least need to know what that is. And for a lot of that search, you need to be signed out of everything. You need to acknowledge that you have this filter bubble. You need to use Google, and you need to use DuckDuckGo. You know, just what would a normal person, not in our position, be able to see? And then where I go from there is, what would a normal person, not a normal person, but what would we be able to find? That's the next step I take. In terms of how far out do you go, you know, I've had situations where, you know, the parent company is absolutely fine and there are no allegations of impropriety or anything like that, even a publicly traded company. And I've looked at the SEC filing where you can go to litigation proceedings in their annual report. So that's a good place to start with a public company as well. But, you know, they can have private subsidiaries, right? And there's nothing in there. You know, again, just so you know, and others on the call know, you know, no one at the US government is going through every filing that was sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I know that we all love to believe that if it's a government source, then it's been verified and it's, you know, someone's looked at it to approve it. No, no, that doesn't happen. So that being said, you know, while a parent company can be fine, their subsidiaries might be in trouble. So I had an organization client, a large global children's rights related organization and children's health, and they brought forward one of the big accounting firm companies, because, you know, typically companies really want to use, you know, they like that they are aligned publicly in a charitable way with nonprofits who are doing good, right? It's good for their brand. But in this situation, the parent company seemed to be fine, but there was an open investigation in the UK for one of their branches who had performed auditing services for a nonprofit that was a known nonprofit used for money laundering for terrorist activities. But if I had just used, they use MSCI for ESG controversies reporting. If I had just used that source, I never would have found this part. And so in terms of, but to go back to your family, how many layers deep do you go? If that uncle you referenced was the money bags, so to speak, in the family, then you would want to bring forward the controversies around that uncle, right? So think more about, I like to think more about approaching this through the lens of, where did the wealth come from? So, you know, you are what you eat kind of thing, and just follow that supply chain of how that wealth was sourced. If the uncle is involved in that, but the uncle's not the prospect, I would still bring that up. So rather than how many circles of, you know, or how many branches of the family tree do you go down, It has more to do with how much that actually impacted how that donation would come in. Does that help? Anthony? Oh, good. Good. And I think I saw we had some questions. And Rachel, how am I doing on time?
You are doing great. We still have plenty of time. So I saw we had a question from Amy Dana that we might could talk about.
Okay, what was that question? Let's see. What do you think is the biggest issue that we're not addressing in ethics and compliance today? You know, I think what is coming down the path right now for us is a data privacy policy at the federal level. I think that we will see some movement there this year that we haven't seen before. That's been, you know, toyed with. One of the biggest issues I think we have in our sector, you know, it's like we need to find that happy medium. So when, you know, we all love free data sources, right? We all love free data. But should we have that data? Should we use that data? I think that's really where our sector is heading. What is data minimization, and what does that look like in terms of how we can still use those practices of data minimization, but still be successful with our organizations. So my friend Liz Reshman, who's in Canada, she was subbing at her organization for someone who had gone on, I think, on family leave. And so she was a substitute, like, data privacy officer. And when she met with their legal counsel, now this is in Canada, and it is true, Canada has very different laws than we do. Well, when she met with their legal counsel, this was years ago, to perform this function, the lawyer said, you know, if you're using data for purposes for which it wasn't originally made available, that's a violation of Canadian law. So I want you to think about that. So if we're using data that wasn't originally created for our sector to use, we shouldn't be using it. That's hard, right? I mean, think about real estate data, which is the most common, you know, wealth indicator that we all use, was not made publicly available for us to use it in the way in which we're using it, right? So if our country's data usage policies start going down that road, that will be an interesting path. I live in Florida, and I think it was last year, the data privacy law, or maybe it was 2019, the data privacy law that was being considered by the state absolutely specified real estate data shall not be used except for the purposes for which it was made public. Well, that didn't pass. It doesn't mean that it won't someday, but that did not pass in that way. So all of the states are considering data privacy laws, and they're all slightly different from each other. And this is posing an issue. So like we all need to look as a sector at, all right, where does our prospect live? Okay, so what are the laws of that state in terms of data usage and data privacy? It's interesting. It's a hodgepodge. The International Association of Privacy Professionals, they have a wonderful website where they monitor all the state laws, and it's available to anyone without being a member. And that is really helpful. Let's see. Did I cover the biggest issue that we're not addressing? I do think that while we as prospect development professionals don't necessarily sign contracts for all of the tech tools our organization uses, we need to be involved in some of that. We should be being used for, vetting vendors. And again, that toolkit is coming out probably by July. And because there are terms of service in there that our organizations agree to that are really bad. They are really bad. Like, hey, you acknowledge that you have ownership of this data and that you, the organization, has ownership of this data, and you, the organization, have made sure that any laws requiring consent have been followed. So vendors are pushing the liability off onto the organizations for that. This is an issue, in my opinion. All right. Was there another question? Or let's see. What do you think? Do you have opinions on ethics for current events? Ooh, Holly, tell me more about your question. Is Holly still here? Yep.
Yes, I'm here. I didn't have anything in mind specifically, but are there any current events that has to do with ethics on the information that we as researchers gather on a daily basis?
Well, I do have, I've been thinking a lot about, as we all have, I'm sure, on usage of DEI data, for example, but also just the concept of how our sector has ever developed. We call it that there's an art and science to give capacity calculation, right? I think we need to be more thoughtful about how that was even developed. Okay, so if we go back in time to like 1992-ish, there was an article, I think, that came out in Case Currents magazine that had to do with, I think it was titled, "How Much Is That Donor in the Window?" Something like that, a riff off of "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?" that song. But what it put forward is a lot of what we use now, right? It put forward, a way to calculate someone's estimated net worth, to get to some estimated gift capacity. Okay, well that was groovy. What did they use? They used the IRS estate data, which we can all get. We can get today, and I can't remember what the most updated data is for that, but anyone can go to the IRS website and access that data. So it's not to the individual, but it's in aggregate. Here's a study of the top estates in the country based on their tax returns. Well, when we consider DEI issues and justice issues, wealth was not created in the same way for every ethnicity. Let's go that route. So when we have created these gift capacity formulas that largely involve real estate values, we are using biased data. We think it's not biased. It's biased when you go down the path of how, why does that same size house as mine, why is that valued less than mine, right? and we go down the path of wealthy zip codes. Well, where did redlining come in for all of that? So I think as we, as a sector, you know, the whole charitable giving sector, as we go further down the path of trying to be more diverse and be more inclusive, we're going to have to tackle that as prospect researchers, as prospect development professionals. How do we get that door open wider for more people who love our organizations to actually have that same engagement experience that we reserve for what we consider to be the top prospects? I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some thoughts that I keep thinking about, right? And there's a book. How many of you read The Millionaire Next Door? You know, it's, I think the original book what came out in like 1996 or something like that. Hey, Christine, of course you did. So there is another book. So let me tell you about this book first. So The Millionaire Next Door was written by Thomas Stanley, and there was a co-author. They essentially researched very affluent people. Millionaire next door. You know, what kind of car did they drive? How did they budget for charitable giving? You know, I mean, it's a fabulous book. If you haven't read it, you should. But and what kind of car do they drive? It's usually a used, or not a used, but an old Camry, believe it or not. So anyway, a new book has come out, or newish. It came out in 2018, called The Next Millionaire Next Door. And that was co-authored by now the late Thomas Stanley, but his daughter is the other author. And she has a data company where they study affluent people. Her data company, oh, what's the name of it? It's going to drive me nuts. David would say that's a short drive. But this book is fascinating. It came out in 2018. I really wish that APRA would have her speak. I know all of you are like, oh, well, we're going to get her to speak at APRA Arkansas. You probably could. Her company's in Marietta, Georgia. And but the Next Millionaire Next Door is incredibly, I mean, like what they ended up doing here was, here's the research of the affluent paired up against your normal average person. Okay. It is fascinating. It is fascinating. And I think it's something that, you know, many of our data vendors can't necessarily pick up the millionaire next door in their products, because they don't spend their money on a Tesla. You know, they don't necessarily spend their money on a second home, and they don't necessarily have the biggest home in the neighborhood. Did that answer the question? I think it did. Somebody let me know if that did not answer the question. Again, I can talk forever on this stuff. Amy, I saw you posted something in chat. Do you think it will be on the level of Europe? Oh, for the data privacy laws. Sorry, the pollinating has started here. So I've got all kinds of pollen coming into the house from the corgi. Do I think it will be on the level of Europe? I think there's some pieces that will probably be on the same level. But I think there's so much money in our politics. It will not be exactly the same as the GDPR. There's no way. I do think that social media, oddly enough, has really pushed the envelope there, because the more in trouble social media and the big tech companies get at the federal level, the more likely it will be that we'll have a more restrictive data privacy law at the federal level. Do I think the policy will be modeled after California's policy? Yes. Mhm. I do. That's the short answer. Perfect. So data points. Thank you, Anthony. Yes, data points. So that's Dr. Sarah Stanley Filla's company. So that's the article on Sarah Stanley Filla. Yeah, thank you. It's so nice talking to researchers. But yeah, you can catch some podcasts that she's been on. So Dr. Sarah on YouTube, you can search YouTube and listen to her. Do you think, all right, so do you think, so here's the question. Do I think the privacy laws will be driven by one party, or will it be bipartisan? One of my favorite phrases is follow the money. So if you're wondering why something happened, well, is there a money component to it? Usually, I know I sound very jaded, but usually there is a money component to it. So follow the money. Will it be by one party, or will it be bipartisan? I think it depends. It depends on how politicians get their donations, right? So who are their supporters? I think that's really what's going to drive it. Now, I do think that the states coming out with all of their very different data privacy laws will have an impact there. There's one particular to keep an eye out for. Cory Booker had put forward this legislation around algorithms and bias. So where that stemmed from, there are these algorithms that are used in our legal system, in our court system, to determine the prison sentences of convicted felons. Okay, and it's incredibly biased. It's been proven it's incredibly biased, because it's modeled. The model comes from, well, here's all the data we have about people who are incarcerated. So we're going to develop this algorithm based on all of this data. And the majority of the race of the incarcerated data population, right, is Black. And it's incredibly biased. Well, it's, yes, in machine learning, if your data is biased, then your algorithm is also going to be, it will also carry forward that bias. So to translate that to our sector, if the only people who have been solicited by your organization for large gifts and have given over time are predominantly white 70-year-old men, and you build a model off of that data, a lookalike model, then all of your prospect pool will look exactly like who has been solicited. So it's the same kind of concept, right? So I do think that we're going to see more laws around algorithms and artificial intelligence. I like what I'm seeing in Vermont, where, for example, data vendors have to register with Vermont if they sell any data. of their citizens, right? There are now registration requirements for these companies, for these data vendors in California as well. So, for example, when we're developing the due diligence toolkit for vendors, that's one thing that you can check, you know, is the vendor we're about to sign up with, are they following the laws that they're supposed to follow? So there are real ways that you can check on that. But I do, you know, my hope is that it's bipartisan, but I suspect with the level of money in our politics, it won't be. Mm-mm. Are there any other questions that I haven't answered yet? Nothing else?
Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add to the discussion? Well, all right. I guess that's going to, Lori, do you have anything you'd like to add or?
No, but well, I will say this, there are some other links in the PowerPoint. If Rachel, if you will make sure they all get that. So there are some resources in there as well. And if at any time you're going through anything on the APRA Ethics and Compliance website and you're like, I have a question about that, please feel free to get to me or anyone else on the committee. We're always happy to talk about this. And if you have any ideas for an Ask the Ethicist column, we totally enjoy writing those because, you know, we try to have like this, for those who may be old enough to remember Dear Abby, you know, it's that kind of style, but we absolutely enjoy having some tongue-in-cheek puns in there. So if you have any topic, please feel free to bring that forward as well.
Awesome. Well, Lori, thank you so much for chatting with us today. I know we all learned so much from this call, and we really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us.
Well, thanks for having me. And I totally believe in giving you back some time before the next session, because these back-to-back Zooms. Ooh, yes.
Yes. Well, with that, guys, what we're going to do is we are going to take about a 13, that's very on the nose, but a 13-minute break, go to the restroom, get you a drink, take some notes, answer emails, and then we'll be back at 11 o'clock.
Have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori.
Bye.
Bye. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we are going to kick off our second presentation of the day. You'll give me just a second. I am admitting everyone who is in the waiting room. Oh, okay, looks like it's going through. Perfect. Let me pull up my notes. So our next speaker for our second session is Jen Filla, a resourceful fundraiser with an innovative focus on prospect research. It's a great day for Jen when she can help an organization focus and connect with its best donor prospects. As president of Aspire Research Group, LLC, or help a prospect research professional learn and apply a new skill as CEO of the Prospect Research Institute. Deeply committed to advancing philanthropy in the fundraising profession, Jen is co-author of the Prospect Research for Fundraisers, the Essential Handbook, part of the AFP Wiley Fund Development Series, and has authored numerous prospect research workbooks. She has also served as a volunteer and trustee for numerous organizations over the years, including the Center Foundation and Habitat for Humanity of Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Jen is a member of the Association of Professional Researchers for Advancement, APRA. I swear I've had my coffee this morning. And the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, and has served on both local chapter boards. She received a BS from Newman University. So Jen, with that, if you'll take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. It helps when I unmute myself. So you can hear me okay and all's good? Great. Thank you so much for what a great introduction and for offering this presentation to everyone. So I noticed in the chat we have someone from Minnesota. I see a lot of familiar faces, so it's really wonderful. The pandemic has brought us just this great opportunities to connect, and for our profession, which is geographically dispersed, that's a beautiful thing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Although truth be told, I really prepared for a 1-hour presentation, and it looks like I have an hour and a half, which means that we will have opportunity to do some breakout rooms. Queuing you up, Rachel. I think we're going to have some great discussion about company fundraising research, and also because it's a bit ambiguous and it's huge, much like individuals actually. So before we get started with In Good Company, I wanted to point out, if you haven't had an opportunity yet today to connect with others at this conference, go ahead in the chat, introduce yourselves. I think sometimes we forget, like, we can do this even virtually. And I'm also going to be encouraging you to share your stories, ask your questions, etc. in the chat. And Rachel is going to help me so that when we pause the presentation to address that, she's going to pull out stuff. And I also wanted to let you know that you can save the chat if you haven't already discussed this in today's conference or learned it before. So when you have that chat panel open, you'll see at the bottom right, or maybe it's the top, look for the ellipses, those 3 dots. And you can actually save the chat to your desktop or your documents, which is so nice. That way, if someone has shared their LinkedIn link or something like that, you don't have to like rush to do everything. You can save the chat and connect with people afterwards as well. So I think one of the most important things about conferences is that we get to connect. And if we have to do them virtually, or if we want to do them virtually, it doesn't prohibit us from connecting with others. So, because we are in good company, right? And I did mention, I thought it was an hour presentation, which means we will have time for breakout rooms. And what I'd like to do is give you guys a question to go, and we'll put you in 2 or 3 people. And that just means you don't have to share your video if you don't want to, but you will share your audio and be able to introduce yourself and then discuss the question. So that way you'll get to personally connect with at least a couple of other people. More than 2 or 3, and I find there's not enough time to have anything meaningful to discuss because we only have like 10 minutes for that. So let's jump into corporate fundraising research and really fundraising. So my first thing is to ask you a question. And if you open the participants window, so in your menu, you click on participants, it's going to open up a window to show all the names of the people here. And you're also going to see some yes, no buttons. That's what I want you to click on. And I want to know if you're doing more corporate foundation or foundation research now. And I'm thinking pandemic time, so 2020 into 2021 than you have before. And I'm going to ask Rachel to kind of give me a heads up. Do we have more reds or more greens?
Perfect. I'd be happy to.
Thanks.
We'll give everybody just a second to respond.
While they're doing that, I just want to tell you that the In Good Company workbook that you're going to be able to download for free at the end was written by Elisa Schoenberger, and she is in our meeting today. So she's pretty excited about this.
Fantastic. So it looks like we've far and away got more greens to red. So we have 11 yeses and 2 nos at this point.
Awesome. Because, and I was hopeful that that would be the outcome, because what we're seeing is that in especially disaster times like pandemic, companies step up. And so the Center for Disaster Philanthropy did a new report about COVID philanthropy, not that it's over yet, right? But corporate giving was accounting for nearly 2/3 of philanthropic funding. So that's $7.9 billion. So while we're always told to fundraise from individuals, and we should, right? We need to engage our full community as a nonprofit, but we shouldn't overlook corporate fundraising. Now, any blanket statement isn't going to fit in fundraising. One size does not fit all, as I'm sure you are well aware. So understanding how corporate fundraising, how companies fit into your organization's revenue picture is important, and maybe how it could fit in the future when you think about different fundraising strategies you could employ with companies. So, for example, a food bank is going to have a lot more opportunity they reach a big audience, right? Their trucks are on the roads, things like that. That's a great corporate opportunity, companies like exposure. So your organization may have great company opportunities for fundraising, or it may not. That may be a small sliver of your overall revenue from fundraising, but it's not to be sniffed at. 7.9 billion is a pretty good number. And 2/3 is a wonderful percentage of giving. So we really have seen companies step up. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the relationship, alignment, and capacity in corporate fundraising and research. And then we're going to touch on profiles. And I am going to follow this order, but I just want to point out that sometimes we as researchers tend to focus on the opposite order. We look at capacity first, right? How can I get a capacity rating for companies? How can I figure out how much we should ask for? That's usually our first go-to because those are data points. That's where we're comfortable. Alignment, that's a little more iffy, right? That's a little more ambiguous. And relationship, well, we just don't even get involved in that. You know, we're doing research. But with companies, I'm going to put out there that I believe relationship really takes precedence over everything else in a way that's different from individuals. Individuals, you can look at their passions and say, wow, they are super passionate about autism. We're going to approach them, or we're going to ask to honor them, or something like that. But with companies, relationship, you might not have an alignment with the company's operations, for example. Maybe they're not a grocery store, they manufacture car tires, but they're passionate about, an individual there is passionate about food security. So I just think relationship, I've seen it happen where it just really takes precedence over everything else, which is not a data point. So that makes us a little uncomfortable. Want to say it again? I'd love to see an active chat. Well, I'm actually not going to see it, Rachel is, but I'm not the only expert in the room here. I see some names. I know you guys are excellent researchers. You may have experiences that I don't have or that others don't have. Love to see you share that, whether it's a good experience, bad experience, a hot tip, something to look out for, a resource. Go ahead and share that. And when the bubbles come up like this on the screen, I'm going to pause. So I'm going to go through each of these 3 blocks and profiles, and I'm going to pause after each one and ask Rachel to kind of summarize that chat or to share what's in there so that we can have everyone participating.
Perfect. I'd be glad to.
Thank you, Rachel. So let's start with relationships, because it is the most important thing with a company, but not always, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, we get company prospects in 2 ways, hopefully. And this certainly happens even as a consultant. Elisa always has her eyes open for who's a good prospect for some of our clients as we're doing our work. So sometimes a fundraiser comes to you and says, I'd like research done on this company. And so you're looking as the researcher for some typical stuff like Does the company have a foundation? Are they aligned? You know, what are their operations all about? And you may not always understand why that frontline fundraiser is asking you for that information. So I would suggest that communication around relationship is key. The frontline fundraiser, usually the more savvy they are, the more this is true, that they're all about the relationships, almost without thinking of some other things, which is why we're such an important piece of the puzzle for a good donor relationship with our organization. So they're not always telling us why they want this information. We need to ask or keep asking those really good questions like, wow, how did you hear about this organization? Did I get the right name of this company? You know, is this who you were thinking about? Is there someone you're meeting with? Because they could have a relationship that you don't know anything about. And that relationship could bring in dollars, even if the data you're looking up doesn't look like it would bring in dollars. I've seen it happen. And then on the other side with the proactive, you're going to be finding organizations where you see an alignment and you're like, hey, fundraiser, do you think we should go for this? Do you want more information? I wouldn't do a full profile on anybody until I think there's an opportunity, because that's a lot of time. So when you're providing your fundraiser with good information and good prospects, and they're providing you with leads to be researched, if you're doing both of those things, you're going to start developing that deeper relationship and that communication around why is this a good prospect. And in the masterclass at the Institute yesterday, we did a case study, healthcare organization that's doing a thank you program where major gift officers are actually calling and being assigned calls, discovery calls, thank you calls for people who are not major gift prospects yet. And what they've discovered is this forces them to do strategic research. And that's what company research is all about. It's strategic. It's why is this a good prospect? You need to make the case as the researcher. So when we're looking for relationships and trying to make the case, I have down in there in the bottom left, mind the DB. You know, it's a takeoff of mind the gap when you're getting on the subways, the trains in the UK. And you need to mine the database in many different ways if possible. So here are some of the ways. Maybe you'll have some information in the chat about this or some success stories. I worked with an organization once where they had specifically 5 strategies, and one of them was C-suite. Like who sitting in the chief, you know, chief executive officer, CEO, chief technology officer, all the chiefs, the C-suite, what are their passions? Are they philanthropic? You know, how are they going to be leading the company in philanthropic objectives? Are there employee donors? Do we have donors in our database who work at that company? And if you have good occupation data, you're going to know that from a good search. Is there company foundation? Is that foundation a donor to your organization? Do we have volunteers at our organization that are part of that company? CSR, corporate social responsibility. Is there a corporate social responsibility program at this company? Does that align in any way with what we do? Are there any marketing opportunities? And that's the typical, right? You know, small nonprofits and startups and new to fundraising, people always think sponsorship, we can get a sponsorship dollars, that's marketing dollars, but that's just one piece of the pie. Here are some ideas or tips for finding those people. So you mind your database, but what about externally? Let's say you're working on a company that has alignment. You may or may not have a relationship. Sometimes we get thrown names, right? I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but oh, you know, this top donor has a relationship at this big company and they say they're going to introduce me to Terry, what's her name? And now the fundraiser says to you, I need that contact information. Look her up, find out everything you can about this company. So we get this all the time. And I like to use a Google and LinkedIn kind of tag team effort when I do this. And I'd love to hear, I'm going to pause after this for the chat, what you do to find people. So I'm often using, well, just a note, LinkedIn forgets that people like us are customers, right? It's a little frustrating for me. They're very focused on job search, but not on networking, and that's what we use it for. So I'll often do my search for someone in Google. I'm already logged into LinkedIn, so I'm using or under their terms of engagement. This isn't anything we shouldn't be doing. So I'm logged into LinkedIn, but I'm using Google to source that link to the LinkedIn profile because I find that the LinkedIn search is not effective. So, and it also caps out if you're in a free account, maxes out. So I use the Google search, I find that link, and then I open it up in LinkedIn when I'm logged in, and I can find out more information, and I might get some good contact info. On the other side of it, I might look for the LinkedIn company profile, and then it lists all the people. So, you know, when someone works at that organization, it has a list of all them, and I can go in there. Because sometimes I don't even have a name. I'm looking for, how do they name these types of positions? I want to find someone in the CSR group. How do they title those people? Or I'm looking for someone in their marketing department or the foundation. What kind of titles are they giving? And then I can search for those people. I also wanted to point out that if I would think everyone in the group is going to know about this already, but the Google Advanced Search Operator, I'm always surprised who doesn't know about it. And it's the second bullet from the bottom on the right under Google. It's using your keyword. So that could be somebody's name, it could be a title, and then site : no space, and the company's domain. So company.com. And then it's going to find that you're searching only that company website. I have gotten such quick information from that, just would have taken me forever to find otherwise. So whatever you're looking for, maybe you're looking for press releases, things like that, anything you want to find on that company's website. And then of course, in the news, you're going to source leads about, especially when there's a foundation representative, when they announce their gifts, etc. So I'm going to pause and ask Rachel if we have some stuff to share about relationships or anything that's in the chat.
So Libby shared that relationships are vital. What we struggle with as a large public university is getting the 360 view of which faculty and staff have relationships with individuals representing companies. We're always working on that.
Absolutely. So the one organization we have is environmental, and they work with scientists. And I just know, you know, if we had a magic wand for all the relationships those scientists have with companies that could be potential sponsors or participate in different programs at this organization, we don't have it, but yes, it's a big challenge to get your internal knowledge into data points that you can actually use. It's a struggle. Struggle is real. Anything else, Rachel?
It looks like Viola just sent in, I love that Google site search feature. I use that all the time. You can use it to search for the person's name on certain types of websites too. So for example, site.org or site:/.edu, which usually turns up their volunteering and giving.
Aha, that's great tip. Yes, you can put just org or edu or whatever extension. And actually with different countries, that can be helpful too, because you can use the country extension. Good point, Viola. All right, well, keep up the good work with the tips. Let's move on to alignment. So alignment, of course, is key. We'd love it if the company is just all about our organization's mission. That would be great, because then we'd have many points of entry. So we look for things like operations. What does the company do? If it's a grocery store, it's probably aligned with a food bank, right? That's an obvious one. Foundation. If the company has a foundation, this is a big signal that they're philanthropic, or at least have some kind of philanthropic objectives. We know that companies often use a foundation, or now donor advised funds, to do the company matching. So I work at Johnson & Johnson, I make a gift to you, and then Johnson & Johnson has an employee matching program, and they pay it out of their foundation. So sometimes that's all the foundation does, and the rest is done in corporate giving. So we may find corporate giving in our usual searches, whether you're using Donor Search or iWave or Noses Search or whatever the tool is that you use for individual giving. You can also search for the company name, or as Viola mentioned, searching using the extensions, .org, .edu, to find how they might be philanthropic. Marketing, of course, they may have marketing objectives. If they're a grocery store and they're opening up, they have a strategy to open up 5 new locations in your county and you're a food bank, you may say, hey, we can help you with that. You know, would you sponsor X, Y, and Z so that you get more exposure in that market? CSR, another pretty obvious one, corporate social responsibility. So if they have objectives they need to meet, and some of the really large multinational companies, this is important to them. They have various competing obligations across countries. So that can be a point of entry. Human resources. Now we've, at least in the US, we've noticed a lot more funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's so much happening. And we have a client that has utilized this well. They have a very strong program that they can help companies meet their obligations and their goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So human resources is a place to go look. So maybe you know all these. You're like, geez, Jen, I've heard all this 1,000 times before. I wonder if you've ever had a wild card, and throw it in the chat if you've had it, where it's nothing you would have ever thought made sense. Maybe the fundraiser comes to you and says, hey, this donor is going to introduce us to so-and-so, or this donor works at this company and they work in this department. And this department has a goal that you and I would have never known about because it's not public. And it's a great alignment with this program or this fundraising priority we have. And would you please fall into that rabbit hole and find me everything you can about how we could create or craft a proposal and partnership around this. Those wild cards are amazing. It's kind of fun and exciting when you get one of them. And it's always something to be mindful of because the wild card could be on your side of the equation here. You may work at an institution or an organization that has so many giving opportunities. So just like it's difficult to wrap our hands around all the relationships we may have internally because we have so many researchers or scientists or program people who are active in their communities, you might also have a lot of gift opportunities, and you may not know yourself whether there's an alignment because there are so many opportunities there. And sometimes it's a matter of researching your own organization to discover that, or just staying abreast of your organization's work in a way that helps you recognize a wildcard opportunity when you are reviewing a company. Something that your fundraiser might not know about, and you get to share this strategy, this strategic information where they could take action in a way they would have never known about otherwise. So opportunities, wildcards can happen on both sides of the fence there. And then just a note about alignment in terms of size. We can think of companies as having a lot of structure around their giving programs, and many companies do, especially larger companies. They tend to have philanthropic programs that are more formalized because they have objectives. They're big. They have to put structure in place or it goes wonky, right? Which on the small side often happens. If it's a founder or founding company and it's maybe multi-million-dollar company, but it's still small, oftentimes there aren't philanthropic objectives stated anywhere. And it might be motivated more by the CEO or the founder or owner than anything else. But that can be reversed. Some larger companies, surprisingly, do not have strong philanthropic programs or objectives. And we can walk in with opportunities for them that help them get more structured. For example, if they're concerned about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we have programming that could really help them, that's great. If they're having recruitment issues, they're struggling to get trained people, or struggling to get people who are very expert because these new recruits want meaningful work and the company to date hasn't done anything philanthropically. So there's lots of opportunities there, and vice versa, so that you can switch roles. Sometimes it is led by a C-suite person, sometimes it's not. There may be what we would call in individual terms a wealth event. There may be a deal-making event happening at a company that you wouldn't know about, but that person is your donor. And so there's an opportunity for them to send money your way. It may be a one-time only, but it could be big. I've seen this start programs at organizations because the top donor has an opportunity. They're making a deal with the company and they have an opportunity to really have influence over where some dollars could go. I'm seeing the orange light flashing in chat. I'm ever hopeful that you guys have experiences to share here as well. And even when you have corporate fundraising going on, you have some savvy fundraisers, sometimes there needs to be a mindset shift. And that's why I threw this in here, because I had a client surprise me once. Savvy fundraiser, but she was looking to expand into doing more corporate fundraising. And the approach was going to be a dump. You know, like, let's show up with them. They should be aligned with us. And we'll just like dump on them all about our program and all the things they could get involved in. And then, you know, they'll probably want to be interested. And that's really not the approach, not for individuals, not for companies, not even for foundations. Companies have goals and objectives that they want to fulfill, whether that's for profit or whether it's for their philanthropy, their philanthropic programs. And we need to stop and listen to that. Really listen, because we can help fulfill their goals through our organization's mission, through these fundraising opportunities. And when that happens, it's just such a deeper relationship, and you're likely to get, you know, more money from more places in that company over time. So lifetime giving goes way up. So just a reminder that we still have to treat companies as donors who have their own motivations and their own goals to accomplish. And with that, since the bubbles are up on the screen, I would love to stop and find out what's been going on in that chat, Rachel.
So Libby shared a great point. She said, we've recently launched an industry engagement website and we are now working, moved a little bit. We are now working with companies that reached out to us, companies that I never would have surfaced in research. If you're curious, and she gives the link so you can check it out. And Ira says, this workshop is great. This is covering everything I aim to do in the corporate space and preach internally to my colleagues who work primarily in the individual donor space.
Wonderful. Yeah, bridging to recognizing that corporate money is available and perhaps more appropriate in some places, some giving opportunities. Not everybody's looking that way. Excellent. Okay, go Libby. I'm checking out your website as soon as I get done. Capacity, right? The place we love. We love to talk numbers and we want to like crunch the data and come up with capacity. And I want to point out that absolutely, well, especially when we're starting raw, you know, let's say you're tasked with finding some corporate funders for a new initiative and you can't use anybody in the database, right? Like you need something to start prioritizing. And often that's a % of revenue, right? Or some other number we can gather out in the world. But just want to put it out there again. It's really important to recognize that with companies, relationship could completely skew that. Because if my donor is making a deal with the top of a big company that has a reasonable alignment, they might be able to bring us a really big gift out of that relationship. And that just isn't going to show up in capacity. Also, if you have a CEO who's super passionate about your mission, they can push that foundation gift, or they can match a larger gift, or etc. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but relationship alignment, really, it takes more precedence over capacity once you've come into, here are my prospects. Sometimes we need to prioritize by capacity. So how do we do it? Well, I wanted to show this. It's getting old. It's from 2011. The link is on the screen, but it's such a fun infographic. So on the left column, we have the bubbles. And the larger the bubble, the larger the total dollars being given, right? So these are big companies. Goldman Sachs there, right? They have tons of revenue compared to the top red bubble, which is Kroger, which is a grocery store chain. And on the left column, this is all sorted descending by this, not left, right column, percent of pre-tax profit. So while the sort of industry average is 1% of profit would be my capacity rating, what we see is when there is alignment or philanthropic engagement with a company, some are way more philanthropic than others. 9.2% of pre-tax profit from Kroger goes to philanthropy. Wow. And this was, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's cash. This is a chart of cash giving. The data behind this chart is from Giving USA. So you can buy the data from Giving USA to create these kinds of charts, as opposed to just the reports that we see presented. So I thought this is a fascinating look, and it shows you, it demonstrates how important the alignment is and how important the relationship is, that it can really change the capacity. Again, we got to start somewhere. And that's the same with individual capacity ratings. We start with visible assets in our wealth screenings because that's what's available. And when you have thousands of records and you only have a certain finite amount of time to do manual research, you have to start with your best, and your best has to be prioritized somehow electronically. That requires a number, and revenue can be a good number for that. So I'm not, trashing the revenue numbers. I use them, but just pointing out it's a level, right? We start with prioritizing, but we may need something else to focus on as we start to narrow our list, which is similar to individuals. So 1%, where am I getting that from? There is a free resource, a web page out there kept up by the Prospect Research Institute, and that's a proto page. It's my favorite place for organizing links, collecting them, protopage.com/ProRInstitute. And there's a corporations tab, the corporate giving stats. That's where I was researching to pull the number. So I did this case study for APRA International Conference last year, a client I had where I needed to prioritize their donors, actually. And we did an append to get some revenue and other data to put into which should be the best prospects. And we did capacity as part of that, but it was only one metric out of really a grid of 4 that we use to prioritize their prospects for them. And that's because we had other data. We had giving history, and I appended data like how long had they been in business. We know that companies 5 years plus are much more stable, et cetera, et cetera. So that data is available to you. That resource is out there. And I know that organizations have used giving history to themselves and others as a way of rating for capacity. So, dollars available or dollars likely, or a way of sorting. And I know some organizations have used a combination rating. So you are looking at capacity, and maybe it's based on revenue or giving to others, but also combining that with some kind of relationship and affinity or alignment rating, whether that's manually from the fundraiser or from the researcher, or pulling from data points that are available to you. It's really so dependent on how your organization has its mission, how that comes out in the fundraising priorities and the asks, and what kind of data you can have. So I'm curious if there's anything on capacity. Is anybody doing this? Do you have any tips for us? Has something worked well for you?
We don't have anything in that just yet, but I will keep an eye out.
Okay. Yeah, capacity is a stumper. Sometimes we get frontline fundraisers who feel that we have magic wands or that we should just buy a tool and presto, but we all know private company data doesn't work like that, and most of our companies are private. So that can be a challenge. So the company profile, I'm going to go with it depends again as an answer here. Like, it really depends on your organization, your individual fundraiser that you're working for, what that relationship looks like. But with all that disclaimer in there, I have worked, for example, one organization, they had a very strong corporate fundraising arm. So they had, a department dedicated to this. They were a big national organization. And they had outlined 5 key strategies. So they had a national reach. They had affiliates around the country, which is a really different scenario, right? So they had it just, they're just big. They're just big and they're national. So big companies love to have a national exposure. That's just huge. So they had these great opportunities to work with companies, which is why they had 5 different strategies. That's a lot. That's big. So it was, for me, an eye-opener about how to do corporate fundraising. Suddenly, I had worked at an institution where we just did company profiles the way we researched them, which was like, okay, here's the contact, here's the directors, here's the leadership, here's the financials, and here's the foundation. Like, we just put it in the way that we found it, the way we thought about a company. And this national organization said to me, no, that's not good. We don't want that. We want you to put all the information in our 5 strategies. Well, that's weird. That felt really weird at the time. It was, I had to keep pulling from places and putting it in. And sometimes it felt a little redundant even. So they wanted to know, okay, C-suite, what's the connection there? Are there any philanthropic passions evident? Do we have a connection? And they didn't always know their own connections because they were so big. And so these affiliations the connections or relationships with their affiliates across the country weren't always known to them. So it was very interesting work. They brought in just millions of dollars. They wanted cause marketing, just all these different sort of windows into the company, perspectives, like you would put a template over top of your keyboard and it would show you only some keys. Very interesting way to do it. And on top of that, because they had a whole department and they were sourcing prospects, they wanted we decided on a tear sheet, I call it, but a first page that had only key information they wanted to look at to assess whether they wanted to assign it to so-and-so or et cetera. And that was redundant information. So it took us a little more time to, then make the summary information at the top. So the summary information was used to make the assignments, and then the full profile, which, as we all know, these things can get big, went to the person who was going to be making the outreach and creating the strategy. So knowing if there's a specific strategy, or actually helping your fundraisers to identify some key strategies, sometimes we're working together that way, which is, as the algorithms get better, we need to get more strategic, because that's, if they can gather the information, we need to be the ones who can understand and interpret it. There's also a little bit about your fundraiser. So if you're working with someone who does corporate and foundation relations, they're going to have specific opinions. They're going to have specific experiences with data, with information. They may say to you that there are certain pieces of information that help them the most. And it's not up to me to say they're wrong. They could be doing a better job. It's up to me to help, support, and empower them. So I want to provide that information in a way that's very obvious to them. One thing we used to do in the profession was put our insights, our comments at the end of a profile, because that's how we did the work, right? We put all the information together and then we summarized what was important and interpreted it for them at the bottom, but that's not how they're reading it. So really focusing on our users and putting that at the top. How can I talk billboard? That's the insight, that's the strategic information. I want my billboard about this company at the top. And you can see in the example on your screen, highlights, that's where we're putting what pops for us as researchers. When we look at this information, here's what we think matters about this company. and what you could do about it. And then connections. It may not, the fundraiser may bring you those connections, but they may not always know. Oh, and one of the things, I don't know if I shared about mining the database, just came back to me with his connections. We have a client who thought of something I had not thought of and I thought was brilliant. So he's in the database all the time, and he was going to search for corporate connections by looking up emails that had the company domain. So the company website in the email, of course, right? And you could search your database that way to find evidence, especially because unless you're appending data, knowing everyone's occupation, knowing all your donors' occupation, that's very unlikely. So I thought that was brilliant, and it can help you identify connections internally and externally. It's also important to know how deep you should go. This is a big question, a perennial question. It's never one that's going to be fully answered, but you need to communicate well with your frontline fundraiser, your corporate fundraiser, to find out what's important and to recognize, I think one of the biggest things I learned recently interviewing some librarians, reference librarians, is that when you deliver this profile, it really is the beginning of the conversation with your fundraiser, not the end. And I'm guilty of feeling like I've delivered my product, I'm done. I mean, sure, I'll answer questions, but I think with companies, following up on how the visit went or what they think of this information, it's just as important, if not more important, because companies can be so unwieldy. And it may be difficult for the fundraiser with all the different priorities, competing priorities, to remember and focus on the many ways in which they could enter this company. So what have we got on profiles, if anything? I know people have already been on Zoom for a while, but any comments about the way you profile?
So Libby commented, we do calculate capacity, but like Jen said, it is often less important than alignment or relationships. Another thing to remember is that company priorities and philanthropic goals can change much more quickly than individuals, especially if there has been an executive leadership change.
Yes. So one of the things that happens with companies is that you lose the relationship. And I've certainly experienced this in a institutional environment. So you're spot on, Libby, of course. And I feel that one of the things we can offer our frontline fundraisers and our corporate fundraisers, they may have varying levels of training and experience as well, right? And we want them to succeed. So one of the things we can help them think about or put in our insights or highlights is ways in which we can connect deeper with a company. Maybe you have the first relationship. Maybe it's a gift from the foundation because there's a formal program or a formal corporate giving program. Whatever it is, that's your first open door. But our research can highlight opportunities to broaden that relationship. And when you have a broader relationship, it's much more likely that it's going to survive the change in leadership. Not always the change in business climate, because if they're in the hospitality industry right now, for example, they're hurting. And this would not be a good time. We might have to go silent for a bit on them. But it is a way to broaden the relationship and, to help our corporate fundraiser begin to think in new ways too. We don't ever want our end user to feel stupid. We want them to feel really smart, and we help them shine as a smart fundraiser and do things differently. So I know we like to have the hero status, but when we have clients internally, we need to make them the heroes.
Well, and then we have a comment from the University of Arkansas that says, we often do memo style documents where we detail how they are aligned with particular strategy or campaign on campus. So more of a recommendation style based on something that they see aligns.
Nice. And that's a great way of doing just a little bit of research, right? A very first level, is this going to work? And letting them come back and ask for more to continue that conversation. I'll tell you what, this is off subject for companies, but related foundations, we've been doing a lot of sourcing foundation prospects, and it should be simple. We should just have a tool and presto, we have a list, and it's so not simple. And we get these questions like, can you tell us what's the national funding opportunity for our organization's campaign? Well, and they don't want to spend a lot of money on it. And yeah, so this is always challenging. How can we do that little bit of research to gain momentum for something, or for them to just drop it and say, no, don't do any more. And then we haven't wasted our time. So kudos to you for coming up with that memo way of communicating so you can get the ball rolling or not.
Oh, we do have a question from Jill Slater, if we can grab that, or Salter, excuse me. Do you include a list of corporations' board of members and profiles to see if any relationships exist?
That's a great question. I should have put that in here, but you asked it, so here we go. I have done this successfully, somewhat. When we think about relationships, there's we start inside the box and go out. So we start with our known connections and work our way out, or we start with the external prospects and work our way in. And both are valid. It's just one takes more time than the other. And that's that external, okay, I have a funder, foundation, or a company, and I'm seeing based on the data that this is a good prospect for us. It's aligned with a funding priority, et cetera. But we have to find our way in now. And that frequently happens with companies and foundations. So if you're not finding in your own database that there's some relationships, well, what do? Do we put it to our board? And you can do this well. If your board especially has a development committee that's responsible, it's peer review, right? I mean, it's back before pre-digital stuff. It's the only way you used to be able to source relationships. And what I've done is taken the leadership, given them just enough information about the individual so that they could say, yes, I know this person. And then I've done a grid across, how well. So could you introduce us to this person personally? Could you do an email introduction? Could we drop your name? Because sometimes people want to feel like they're, something hot, and they don't really have that relationship. So that kind of lets them off the hook a little bit. And then another peer review, if you're in campaign, for example, and you wanted to be able to forecast a little, you could ask, what do you think we could get from this foundation or company? But that has worked well to submit those sheets then at the meeting, which was typically done in person, so that these things wouldn't walk away, but they would actually go through and fill it out so that we would source some connections. And that does work. Thank you for bringing it up. Any other questions? So we are totally going to have time for breakout rooms and for getting out early for lunch, which is good, especially if you're the pre-lunch. Were there any other questions, Rachel?
Not at this time. It looks like we have answered them all so far.
Excellent. So,
wait, we do have one. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, we have two. Could you share the ProtoPage website again from Nikki Smith?
Yes. So it's protopage.com. I know it's a little small type there. And then a slash and Pro Art Institute, which I typed out next to it. And that's a collection, a link collection, resource collection. I like ProtoPages because you can have RSS feeds in there. You can embed video from YouTube, for example. You can do multimedia.
Perfect. Sarah Holt from Arkansas Children's Hospital writes, I typically include a list of the company's board members and/or leadership with titles and company profiles. It has become helpful to gift officers when they are talking to their contacts.
That is awesome. We like to do the same thing. In fact, one client, we take a step further and we do a giving search on those top individuals to see where they personally give, because that's a way in to talk about philanthropy. I think it's also often very available information, right? I mean, you're finding that right on the company website. So I think it is important that we do that. Great tip, thank you. Especially on profiles, like how much do we provide? You're right, that's good information.
So Leslie asks, will you be sharing the slides? And the answer is yes, that is our intention, is to share the slides. There will also be a recording of the entire presentation up until the business meeting available. And if you're interested, just email and let us know.
Wonderful. So let's do it, Rachel. Let's put them in groups of 2 to 3.
Okay.
And while you're arranging that, I will go to I'll show them how they can look at In Good Company and talk about that a little bit. And then we'll send them off with a question.
Trajan is organizing our breakout rooms right now, so he should be up and running.
Okay, so before we jump into breakout room, and we'll come back, so we'll go into breakout room and we'll come back, and you can either share in chat what you talked about or some takeaways, or you can talk for real. But I wanted to share with you that you can download In Good Company, and this was written by Elisa Schoenberger. She's here online today, so you could even ask her questions directly. But it's 68 pages, right, of text, mostly text. So this is a serious talk about the corporate fundraising strategies, and then she covers how research fits in. So this is meant for both parties, the frontline fundraisers and the researchers. And it has tons of resource links because Elisa is a researcher. So of course she has like every source she cited and then additional resources. We have a full corporate profile example in there as well. And there's an index of people and companies, people that were quoted, companies that were referenced, and tools are included in that too. So that is available to you for free. Wild. And your question when we go into our breakouts is going to be, and I probably have to stop sharing. We will come back to the slide and I can post it in the chat, but for our question, what I want to do is let you first, you're going to introduce yourself. So you need volume, you need audio when you go into your breakout room. So you're going to introduce each other, you know, here, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so. And then I'd love it if you would talk about what challenges you've had with company research and or communication with your frontline fundraisers. Of course, you can talk about anything you want. You don't have to come back and, you know, get in trouble for not talking about the topic, but it would be great if you would talk about those challenges and how you've, or maybe even some of your successes, so that you can help each other kind of troubleshoot a little bit. I love that when it comes out of a conference and I've got some tips that I can really work with and someone I can ask.
Perfect. And Jen, how long would you like the breakout room to run for?
Right, good question. I'm going to say 10 minutes.
Perfect.
That way you have a chance with 2 or 3 people to really get into discussion.
Perfect. Well, whenever you're ready, Trajan can make them happen.
Let's go. Challenges, triumphs, and tips. Excellent. So what I'm hoping we can do is either unmute yourself and share like a takeaway, or, you know, whatever you want to share with the whole group, or you could do that in chat if you're not comfortable, or if you don't have a mic or whatever is going on there. And then if we have crazy people talking, you know, because I know you guys just can't stop talking, then we could do a raise the hand thing. But
perfect. Well, I will kick us off with saying it was great to chat with Jessica, and it was really encouraging to me how, you know, she's with the Obama Foundation and I'm with the University of Arkansas, but even with that, we have so many similarities in what we face and what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's just refreshing to know that we're all in this together when it comes to prospect research.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, communication's tough no matter what. Does anyone else want to share a takeaway from your conversation? I I saw Ira raise his hand.
I feel like a kid in Zoom school. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for what you all do, because I'm a frontline fundraiser and I don't often get a peek behind the curtain to see what everyone is doing in order to surface things for me. But I would say that the most valuable thing that I could get from research and development in general is to just like actionable items. Like sometimes too much information is paralyzing, and reading a book report is going to waste half of my day, and before I know, I mean, it's interesting, but you can go down all these rabbit holes. Literally, like, just like top line things would always, just to allow me to keep going, would always be amazing. That's all I got. Yeah.
Thanks for coming and thanks for sharing, Ira.
Yeah.
Christine, you wanted to go.
Well, I just had a terrific talk with Shelley and Sarah. And I wanted Shelley to talk for a moment because Shelley has this amazing business research background. And even if you've been in the business for a long time, you can learn a lot from her. Take it from here, Shelley.
Well, basically, Christine and I were sharing about all kinds of reference information that you can get from a public library, because there is a wealth of information out there. And if you don't have a relationship with your reference librarian and you don't have access to your database, you should absolutely get it. Some of the sources that we talked about, everything from LexisNexis and Factiva to possibly Privco. Foundation Directory Online is a phenomenal resource that you usually have to be in a library to use if you don't have your own subscription. But during COVID, I understand that they made it available to people online. What else did we talk about? Reference USA is a phenomenal resource if you're looking for company information. You can search for companies by size, by zip code, by NAICS code, by revenue, number of employees, all kinds of things like that. So there's all kinds of great sources for information that you should be able to check out.
The librarian among us. Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I've lost it, and maybe you have some insight on this. Mergent Online, were they the ones that gave the SWOT analysis of the big companies?
If so, I didn't use it. I did my own SWOTs, but I don't know that possibly somebody might have, but maybe Standard & Poor's, somehow I have that in mind. I'm not sure.
I feel like the company I used to use got bought out and now I can't find it. And we're getting all these big companies. I'm like, someone has done this for us. Anybody else? I know my tummy's rumbling. Leslie.
I know that we have Leadership Connect at the University of Minnesota Foundation. That's been helpful, as is relationship science, RelSci. That can be helpful.
Can you tell us about Leadership Connect, Leslie, if you're willing?
I would really like to, but I only did the training and I haven't used it because I really do deep dive projects and I haven't done any corporate ones that I've needed it. So I'm sorry, but
no problem.
It's I think it's, yeah, you probably know what it is, right?
I can jump in here. It was a resource that.
There's Libby. Thank
you.
Hi,
Leslie.
Libby's my colleague, so Libby's the one who suggested it.
Yeah, it's a great resource that we actually had available through our libraries that I did not know about. And they had a salesperson reach out to someone on our CFR team, and she and I connected. And it's a great resource because they do research and keep profiles, but they also reach out directly to companies and to organizations to validate email addresses and phone numbers. And so I think they go the extra mile to make sure that the information is correct. They also have very attractive profiles about companies and individuals that I've actually sent on to senior leadership and they've been very happy with. So as you know, it saves a lot of time and rather than pulling everything together. So if you look into Leadership Connect, encourage your library to get that so that you don't have to have it come out of your budget. So.
Nice, thanks. That's a hot tip. I had not heard that. Anybody else have something come out of their conversation? Wait, we have a chat. Oh, Libby put the link in the chat. Thank you.
Just a side note on the Leadership Connect. We don't have it currently, but we used to use it primarily around connections with corporate foundation relations and then also government, because they have a big presence in the DC metro area. And so they have a lot of information also and profiles about people involved with different parts of the government and the US federal government particularly. And so that can be really helpful on that side if you're trying to get a kind of a three-piece strategy in for a project that's going to involve multiple partners.
Great, thank you. Yeah, government funding is not something I've ever gotten into, and it's a specialty.
So Chris, in the comments had, our fundraisers often ask for help determining if our organization has connections to a particular company. When you can't find any connections, what next steps do you recommend? Getting board help is a great idea.
Does anybody else want to answer that? Okay, we can't ask Libby because she's already answered too many questions. When you're looking for connections to a particular company, in my experience, it's a tedious process. So if you have a tool like Leadership Connect, sounds like, that's great. If you have good database information, like you have kept your data clean, it's been updated, you have occupation appended, like that makes it easier to find connections. But what we have done is that tedious work of listing out, where do they sit? Do we have anyone on our board who sits on that board? Really digging in, or looking for opportunities to make a less than cold call. Is there an introduction? Is there a way to invite them to something, make some kind of outreach that isn't as warm? Or is there someone who has stature, who is a peer, who can make that introduction? So that is tricky, but Amanda has an option for you. She says, we are a healthcare organization and we work with our supply chain folks who can connect us to the right person in the corporations we partner with. So there are other ways in. Vendors are a great relationship. They want to help you, and those salespeople might have influence in their organization, but at the least they have access to their organization's directory of people. So that's always helpful. Or if you can make outreach to internal candidates like your deans or the scientists who work for you, etc. Sometimes we're not building those relationships, but we could be. We could ask those people to review a list or organize a group of people or walk around to their cubicles if we're back in the office. Sometimes you have to get creative, and sometimes there simply isn't a connection. We could spend more time not finding a connection sometimes than finding one, unfortunately. Great questions. Oh my gosh, we are like at time. My stomach is grumbling. Oh, alumni. Elisa made the suggestion. You may have alumni leaders who could help you connect with people. I think we're good. If we have no more questions or no more sharing, don't forget you can save the chat. Look for the ellipses. I see them in the bottom right, and it puts it on in my own folder so I can access that.
Well, and Jen, we want to say thank you so much for coming to our conference and speaking to us. I know we have all learned so much from your expertise. And thank you to everyone for your active chat and participation in this. This has been a fantastic, fantastic session.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for you experts out there chiming in. That's very helpful.
Awesome. Well, guys, what we're going to have happen now is, if you want to stick around for the APRA Arkansas business meeting at 1 o'clock Central, you're welcome to come crash and hang out. Otherwise, this wraps our educational portion of the conference, and APRA Arkansas members will meet back at 1 o'clock to the same Zoom link to have our business meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Have a great day.